Start talking this week about memory acquisition. And memory acquisition has really become one of the more important changes in the field of digital forensics. It is one that is caused some contention across different schools of thought, and that is whether, as incident responders, when we arrive on scene, we have a live system. Should we unplug, shut the power down for data evidence preservation, or are we doing ourselves a disfavor by actually going in and unplugging and really losing some valuable volatile evidence? Memory acquisition, it's not new. It's been around for many, many years. And previously, and even some today, some schools of thought, some agencies, organizations resist memory acquisition because of its complexity. There's this maybe intimidation factor. And there's a lot of new tools that have really developed over the past 5 or 10 years where really acquiring memory from a triage incident response standpoint is not as complex as it used to be. You have tools like F-Response from a remote collection that incident responders can use to image RAM as if it was, just a physical drive using whatever imaging tools, the investigator would be comfortable with. There's still a lot of discussion, though, about the most appropriate thing to do when responding to a computer system that is still powered on. And many agencies, whether it's law enforcement, private investigative, private sector, or even internal investigative teams, still teach and push upon personnel pulling the plug is just the safest bet from the back of the machine. And there are still others that recommend collecting and documenting all volatile data, including RAM, our random access memory, before powering the system down. And in this lecture, that's what I want to challenge you on and expose you to some of the important artifacts that can really support our investigations in looking at volatile data. When we look at volatile data, many agencies may not be immediately aware of what information is evidence when they arrive on scene, okay? And you look back at kind of the benchmark, at least from criminal investigations, the Department of Justice really advises incident responders to document and preserve as much information as they can, okay? Now, the suggestion is, as incident responders, as digital forensic investigators, that we are trained. We go through, we get our degrees like you're here at Champlain. You go through trainings, maybe through GIAC, or you get your vendor certifications through NCASE, FTK, and so on. You're trained, hopefully, with this mindset of preserving and collecting as much data as possible. And so when we don't really include preserving and collecting volatile data, we're missing out, okay? The old argument is that you're changing and altering evidence if you do anything other than pulling the power plug. And that's one that I would challenge you to really think beyond in this course. With a lot of the popularity of encryption programs that have come about, TrueCrypt, Sophos, Bitdefender, things like that, or BitLocker, excuse me, pulling the power plug has really resulted in a lot of stuff that has been missed. And there is this popular claim that you'll see sometimes from maybe the defense side in a investigation for litigation that maybe there's this controlling that's happening on their client system, some remote Trojan or remote access cause the incriminating activity, and we would miss that, and we wouldn't be able to refute that claim if we didn't have the collection of volatile data, and it really becomes much more difficult to actually defend against that claim. So when we look at responding to an incident involving digital evidence, the general rule should be that we preserve as much data as possible, as the way that we found it, obviously, when we arrived on scene. And when we look at, and we talked about this during week 1's lecture, this order of volatility, well, the most immediate priority should be to capture our volatile data, okay? So that is the most important thing to consider. And volatile data is just data that will disappear or be destroyed once the computer system is powered off. Now, typically, this is our random access memory, but it does go beyond that. Volatile data is also current active network connections, okay? We can get running applications, opening and listening network connections. So much of the data is really extremely valuable to determine or refute that someone was remotely connected to a computer system controlling the activity, and therefore possibly the subject of the investigation could be innocent. So it becomes really difficult for us to refute those claims if we don't look at volatile data. Now the question is, will this change the evidence if we start looking at volatile data? And the big question that we have to think about is changes in the registry, because most of the time in our incident response kits, when we're actually going on scene, or at least in my practice, you have several removable media devices that you use, one for collecting the evidence and maybe one with your trusted tool sets. We'll talk about those here in just a moment. Okay, so the question is, obviously plugging something into a subject's machine, are you changing? And the answer to that is yes, you are changing registry values, but you're wanting to make sure that you document, okay? Because the big argument is that volatile data collection is going to change or alter the current state of the evidence as you, the investigator, found it, and could potentially make it inadmissible. And that's really not the case, because you're looking at documentation being paramount, and honestly not collecting that volatile data could be detrimental. So when you consider the challenges, kind of the cost versus benefit, it's really important that we consider volatile data and also consider the documentation piece. I think the big challenge, the big concern really is there's no method to write block memory, okay? We have to image RAM and collect volatile data without a write blocker that maybe we're used to, and collecting evidence from traditional dead box or platter drive solid state. So some might say that you're making changes to the system and that could potentially invalidate your evidence. Well, as long as you document your actions and what changes you caused, your evidence is still admissible and valid. And as a matter of fact, I would say that if you don't collect that volatile data, you're possibly not presenting the clearest, most accurate picture, or the most complete picture at least, of the potential evidence that could be either inculpatory or exculpatory. So after memory acquisition, you can now make further assessments of the system. The acquisition is one piece, the analysis of the other, and really determine the state of the system, determine then if it's safe to shut the system down, and then go through your other methods of proper acquisition of the hard drive via write blocker, and then doing an acquisition of the hard drive or hard drives in that system. So when we respond to these, whether it's a computer intrusion or some other type of investigation, for the longest time, we've understood the need for conducting on-site triage, and a lot of times that is still the case. So that is immediately looking for specific items that will actually further your investigation, and that's something that you don't necessarily always have the luxury of, bringing back to a high-speed, well-equipped lab. You may have to do some quick on-the-site triaging, and that's where memory acquisition really comes into play. So when we look at the benefit of that, it really helps us identify some additional immediate investigative leads. And the second benefit is from the law enforcement side. I know several of you are in the law enforcement community. Really the ability to confront maybe a subject with information with the benefit of maybe specific incriminating information obtained by that triage that could personally help or specifically help your investigation even in the most immediate moments there. So when we look at memory, these are the things that we see here on the slide that are sitting in memory. Processes, files, directories that could really be sitting in that residue in memory, and you can use this information to piece together old history and commands that a previous individual may have typed into the system. You might discover old emails or websites that the user surfed to. You might find residue from processes that were exited. Okay, or you might have passwords, right? Those are extremely useful for both encryption and maybe other programs that are still in clear text residing there in memory. So with the increased, as we said earlier, use of encryption, particularly whole disk encryption like BitLocker, and then formerly with TrueCrypt, it's more important now than ever that we image RAM. and collect volatile data on any powered on system that we come across that's within the scope of our investigation. And that's, again, the order of volatility. It's the most volatile piece of evidence. It's also one of the most valuable when we look at, evidence in general, is that volatile data, that RAM. So when we look at the investigation, it's important to consider that when we look at the analysis of memory, that's part 2, and understanding exactly what that can actually provide to us, we have to understand what tools we need to actually look at using. Well, from an acquisition standpoint, most of you are familiar with FTK Imager. We cover it in this course. And to be a free tool, FTK Imager does an excellent job of being very diverse, because you can actually do acquisition of memory, which we'll cover in the labs in this course, of actually acquiring a memory image using FTK Imager. Now, there are other tools that you'll see. Magnet, who is the company that puts together Internet Evidence Finder and Axiom. They also have a free RAM capturing tool as well, Magnet RAM Capture. Command Line, if that's your flavor, dump it. And then Mandiant Redline, another free tool that can both acquire and analyze. And then finally, once you have your memory image, you can also use Volatility, which is a robust command line tool to actually analyze that memory image and that memory dump. I want to make a note regarding Volatility, because I understand command line can be intimidating or maybe new territory for some of you. There is a tool that recently came out from Passmark that is actually a free Volatility workbench. It's a graphical interface for Volatility that is a good stepping off point to learning about the different types of plugins and the command line syntax for Volatility. And so this is just a preview of that, and this allows you to basically take an image file, profile it, whatever the system that you acquired the image from, and then be able to go through and actually run an image of, or at least the plugins, if you will, of what's going on inside of Volatility. And that's what this looks like here. So I pointed it to the image file, selected the correct profile. So this particular image came from a Windows Vista 32-bit machine. And then from there, these are all the various plugins that you could run from the command line. And so for here, I just did a process list. And what I like about it is you can see in this window that the actual command itself, running PS list, allows you to get a better understanding of how to put together the syntax. But I would encourage you to take a look at that as another tool for your analysis if you're not very familiar with using Volatility, because it is a primarily command line tool. All right, so when we start talking about imaging process, using things like Dumpit or FTK Imager, the great thing about these particular utilities, they're very light. They're things that you can place on in your response kits when you're going out on a removable media, something like a 32 gig or 64 gig, and it's really nice to be able to have these tools on hand and actually doing your acquisition. So the question remains then, if we're looking at the tools, we now have the memory, we now have acquired the memory itself. Are we now ready to, go through and unplug the system? Well, what I would challenge you is that beyond just doing the acquisition of memory, you want to then now look at the potential for encrypted volumes, okay? Now, why is that important? Well, we have to understand that encrypted volumes are can be our foe. They can be our enemy in this. Is there evidence of encryption? How do we find this out? So you have the imaged RAM, and you might be thinking that you're good to go now, but there's really this important step that cannot be missed, and that is, suggesting that there is encryption on the system, okay? What if the drive is, full disk encrypted? Is there an encrypted folder or volume that's currently mounted, and once you pull that power, you may then not have access to the contents of that folder any longer, or that volume. So one of the most important things we have to do now that we've captured our RAM is actually, before we power off, and remove that hard drive, is to check to see if it's encrypted. Okay, so if there were indications that the drive was encrypted, it would be advisable to image the drive while it was powered on. So let me say that again. If you had indications that the drive was encrypted, it would be advisable to image that drive while it was still powered on and live, because think about it. If you power off the system, you likely will not be able to recover the keys if encryption was enabled. So if you perform a live image of a drive that is, due to encryption, you should always image the logical drive instead of the physical one. Okay, so if you perform a live image of a drive due to encryption, you should always image the logical drive instead of the physical one, because the logical drive is seen as unencrypted by the local machine while the physical disk is still encrypted at the disk level. Okay, never make assumptions though that you're not dealing with encryption, because it's very possible and increasingly popular method for trying to hide and obfuscate evidence is using encryption. Always check. Okay, so one of the ways that you can do that is actually using another free tool that's actually made by Magnet. It's called Encrypted Disk Detector. Okay, and so Encrypted Disk Detector allows you to check, and this is another tool that you could have on a USB device that would allow you to run and check and see if there is encrypted volumes. Okay, and so you're looking at searching for quite a few different pieces of software there. Sophos is one, TrueCrypt, VeriCrypt, things like that. Those are all tools that you can actually check for to see if you have encrypted volumes. Okay, so I'm going to bring up Encrypted Disk Detector now. Okay, so this is the Encrypted Disk Detector, very easy to run. You open it up, hit accept, and then it's going to scan the physical drives for encrypted volumes: TrueCrypt, BitLocker, SafeBoot, BestCrypt, Checkpoint. Okay, and it will let you know if there is any encryption on this particular drive. Okay, so you check using that, and again, keep in mind, if you do come back with the results showing that there is encryption, you should always image the logical drive instead of the physical one. Again, because a logical drive is seen as unencrypted by the local machine while the physical disk is still encrypted at the disk level. So again, Encrypted Disk Detector, simple command line tool that checks the local physical drives on a system for these encrypted volumes. Okay, and it does not attempt to locate encrypted volumes that are not mounted. Okay, so its purpose really is just to alert you of currently accessible drives and volumes that may be encrypted and may be inaccessible if the system was actually shut down. Okay, so another great tool to have in your response kit and quickly and non-intrusively check for encrypted volumes. So just to wrap up, when we look at memory images from the analysis piece, some of you may want to go above and beyond and look at what you're actually pulling down, and data stream carving, recovering key data, process space examination, looking at encryption keys, memory is really something that we find as a huge benefit to our investigations. Okay, so have fun with the labs this week and really get out there and look at some of the different options. Maybe test drive the Volatility workbench maybe after you acquire image of your own system, memory image, and please let me know if you have any questions.